Hello, good evening. This is Filiberto Amati, and we're here today for another of our episodes on the research of the future of design and design thinking. Marco Bevolo is going to introduce our esteemed guest of today. Thank you, Malcolm, and welcome.
Thank you, Filiberto. We are very pleased to host the co-founder of Massive Change Network in Chicago, uh, the current host of the Healthcare 2049 podcast program that is running on various social media platforms, and especially the very talented personality Bisi Williams. Bisi, welcome to our series. We are delighted that you are with us tonight, and we are going to explore a few points on the future of design and on the future of design thinking, on your vision. We have seen various editorial products by Bruce Mau that represent the backbone, the intellectual skeleton behind the practice of massive change network. And now we are delighted to take the time and get to know better the co-founder of this practice and studio. So the first question is actually how you decided to co-found the studio. You met Bruce in 1988. I think you were in Milan with him in 1995, but living on the Canadian time zone. So we never met, although we were both working at Flash Art International with Giancarlo Politi and Elena Contova. How did you come to the decision to join him not only in life but also in work?
Wow, that's a great question, Marco and Filberto. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm super excited to be here and talk about my favorite subject, besides my husband Bruce, design and the future of design. So I'm thrilled to be here. So that's a rather loaded question. Design for me was a mystery until I met Bruce. I was very much involved in the humanities. The family background, the work that we do was largely sciences and medicine and, very, very academic fare. And so the idea of design was rather foreign. I mean, we knew big D design. When I was in journalism school, when I met Bruce, like donkeys and eons ago, you know, um, I met him studying Chinese history, and Bruce had just finished designing Zone 1 2. And they was explaining to me, well, he designed the book, and it's typical. Well, did you write the book? Well, no. Did you glue the pages together? No. Did you do da 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 da? And then it was really a whole world, and he opened my eyes to that. And then I realized as a journalist that I was actually a designer, and we were not taught design at all. And you were splicing and putting things together, didn't know about montage, etc. And then it just opened my brain, and I realized that there are different types of intelligence. And I kind of made it a mission for those of us on the humanities side to sort of bridge that gap. So there's not only the social emotional component of design and not understanding it, but also understanding that the different intelligences and how they might approach a problem, and then design that link. So if you want to think about that, for me, if you think about the genesis of design thinking, that's where it happened. Because I realized that designers would say things and they would do things, and the client would be completely bewildered, eyes blinking, not understanding the process, not really understanding the value. And I realized that there's a translation that had to happen. And then the second thing I realized is that, wow, this design thing is super valuable. I think that we need to articulate it a little clearer so that other people who are actually making businesses or programs or movements or you name it, anyone who has an idea, could actually benefit from someone who has the ability to synthesize and visualize which is very, very key, what is happening. So you can have a client who's spending hundreds of millions of dollars. They won't admit it, they can't read blueprints. They have a vision of a store that they're going to build, and it's all grand, and they're explaining that the escalator is going to go here and the foyer is going to look like this. And without a word of a lie, um, we were with a client, and Bruce said, "Well, I don't see the escalator." And what do you mean you don't see it? I don't see the escalator. So we made a model, and sure enough, the big money spot, the great big huge 2-story extravaganza was a rather plain, perfunctory piece of engineering. And that for me was the aha moment, right? The real moment of trust, the real moment of vulnerability for the clients who don't know what they don't know and are relying on us as industry experts to actually guide them through this journey. So that's kind of where I begin, and I was always the advocate. So when we started Massive Change in 2010, that's when I realized that I was mature enough to actually work with Bruce, and that I was actually mature enough to have some ideas and a perspective in terms of how we could collaborate together, and where are the lanes that we play, and where I could be additive to this process. And so bringing a heavy research analysis into the design process, looking at data, really looking at storytelling, looking at the social emotional compact or impact of what we do. And we started Massive Change in 2010 after the market crashed. And you realize that we had all sorts of design solutions, but they weren't codified. That in fact, design is the ticket to get us out of this mess. But you can't believe me if I just tell you about it. And so we really spent the last 10 years designing the platform for what we're calling life-centered design. We also have 3 children and recognize that the world was getting more complex, problems were complicated, and that if we could design a platform with tools to allow people to open their minds and open their heart and look at a new way of solving problems, that would be our contribution to the world. And so with that mandate, it was easy for Bruce and I to actually work together in parallel and start the Massive Change Network.
Well, thank you. Actually, you share with Filiberto a very important trait. You both have 3 kids.
Oh, yes.
Whereas I've been very lazy and I have passed on this subject. I would like to ask Filiberto to formulate a question for you related to actually one thing that I found, one notion that I found and that we discussed from the book already in our first interview with Bruce and Julio Mariottino. That is the notion of the blur. In the book, the blur is presented and it's articulated. We actually found it in a paper of ours, Filiberto and I, in 2017, in a kind of trade paper, as a notion he will introduce more eloquently than I can. We published a paper on World Leisure Journal in 2020, incorporating insights from the COVID-19 pandemics. So
before we go to the blur, Marco, may I? Because I actually wanted to build on something that Bisi just said, which struck with me a little bit, which is on one end, we have this gap and this lack of lingua franca between the designers and the clients. No? As an engineering student, I was told that 3D visualization is basically to make non-engineer understand what's going on, but engineers don't need them. So on one end, I think that's basically one insight. But on the other side, Bisi said, design is actually the solution to get out of this mess. So, which of course it's the purpose of this initiative. So, how do we bridge the two? How do we explain to the ones who can't really understand design that design can help us solve the bigger problem? So for non-designers, for dummies.
Right. Well, we spent, right, the last, I would say the 10 years really translating design for non-designers. And we realized that the way that the disciplines talk about it, of course, in the disciplines you have very complicated work. There are problems that you need to solve. But we were dealing at the level of complexity, right? So this is the area of synthesis and translation. And one of the things that we recognized, and this is kind of the space that we play in, is that we use design in the vernacular from a leadership perspective, right? So if you're a leader and you have a vision, you're systematically working towards that vision, right? You do not have all the answers, but you realize that you will need other people along the journey to get you there. In this case, I'm going to start a business. First thing you do, you get a lawyer, you get an accountant. And I say, if you're going to start a business, get a lawyer and an accountant and a designer. Why? Because your designer will actually help you visualize what it is that you're trying to say. They will actually be able to synthesize the money, the verbiage, the story, and this world that you're trying to build, right? You're world building at any stage. And so in order to world build, right, you need a container, if you will, a person who actually understands, and I didn't say an artist, I said a designer, because in design, we have a client and we have an invoice and there's a purchase order and we have to design to budget on time. But in that way, when you work with your designer, they can actually help you organize your thoughts. So in this instance, if you're working with the CEO, we help you with your strategic vision so that everyone in the business can understand what it is that you're saying and you can get alignment. If we're working with the chief operating officer, well then let's organize your operations so that people can understand where things are, how things work, and how you need to communicate effectively. And if you're working with marketing or growth, here's the opportunity, here's the delta, here's the space. We can imagine from a business perspective how you can actually not only secure the place that you're in, but design the future of your business to make you unassailable. So really, I say design is painting with money. You want a visual of this? We can give you your world in 3D. And so that's how we translate it. And then the fourth piece of that is we don't know your business. So we come in super duper humble. We have to learn from you. And learning requires a moment of stepping back and then understanding what it is that you're trying to say so that we can actually translate it clearly. And when you do that, then you allow them to tell you all the things that they wouldn't necessarily tell an expert because the expert already knows. And they come to us to design something different, to design the delta, to make them defensible. And it's that little piece there that if you spend the time with your client, it's not forcing us or forcing them to go on a journey that they don't want to go on, because it's not about us. It's really about them. But in order to understand them, we need a 360 view, and then we need to be able to present them back to themselves. And so that's the bridge. It's like I would never pretend that I'm a surgeon. I might like reading surgical books. I might like to understand that whole world and the history, etc. But I'm not going to do the procedure. But I can actually help you look at your room ergonomically, look at your, what you want to do, how you'd like to do it, how you want to enhance the experience. That's what I realized around 2015 and 17 with New York State Medicaid as they were doing the redesign, where design could actually play a significant role. Where you look at the systems around people, you look around systems around products, technology, communication, there's all sorts of room for design for that synthesis to make everybody better, work to their best game, and actually understand how all of those other disciplines can communicate effectively with each other, right? The knowledge lies within them. We're the translators.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's a beautiful definition. Design is painting with money. And we discussed from the Nexus, the new book by Bruce and Julio Mario Tino, the kind of Italian Renaissance. Actually, the painters in the Italian Renaissance were commissioners who were receiving a check at the end of the commission, and very often were late in the in the way they delivered. Should we go back to the blur, Filiberto? Do you think it's the right time?
Yeah, go ahead, Marco. You can
Well,
do it.
we
No one
identified
undermine you,
this.
so go ahead.
No, not at all, not
Go,
at
go,
all.
go.
We identified, we did a project with Filiberto, I think it was 2017, and we interviewed a number of designers, marketing professionals, corporate leaders in various areas, from pharmaceutics to coffee to hospitality. And our purpose was to identify what could come next as a reaction from digitalization. So how would categories, how would lifestyle further develop along the lines of digitalization? What we found and what we validated as our hypothesis is that of the blur. The blur is, I can make the easiest example. There is not leisure time and working time as 100 years ago or 50 years ago, because nowadays you can be at your office, if you still have an office, and you book your holidays on your mobile phone, and you might sit at home at midnight, and you are working on emails or communication exchange with another continent, straight from your bedroom. So the lines that used to be free time where you express yourself, professional time where you perform to standards, is totally evaporated. We found traces of this phenomenon everywhere, from categories of various drinking products and drinking offering, to the design of hospitality venues where people actually go because it feels like a living room where they actually work. So this is what we found. We further refined the idea, and in 2020 we published it in a peer-reviewed journal. We saw really elements of the pandemic crisis being anticipated in this line of thinking. From the point of view of healthcare, there is also a lot of convergence, anticipatory healthcare, the whole idea to disaggregate big hospitals into regional and local venues, the possibilities of digitalization for remote care and for treatment from distance. How do you see the blur? Do you think in 2049, which is the year of your reference, do you think we will still speak of healthcare and wellness, or do you think we will speak of something else, new categories that do not exist now? And how will design play a role to get there?
Well, that's a great question. And so it's interesting when I look at the blur because the blur, I think, is something that just happens, and that's we don't design it, right? So all of these things are accidental. And so as a result, you get these results. And for me, I've taken an activist stance. So, because I can see how very quickly these things can slide, how the imagination slides, how quickly we're moving. So, for example, so I mean, from my mouth, I'm advocating. I think that speed and acceleration is super important. But I'm also saying we need to take a beat, take a breath. And one of the things in our practice that I'm a huge advocate for, and I've maybe loudly, and I think everyone either capitulated or they see it, is that, from a design perspective, we have to look at it from a 360 view, right? We can't have discrete solutions. If you see something and there are knock-on effects, I think it's incumbent upon us to look at the knock-on effects, or at least question them and then run those numbers. And so when I look at where we are and what's possible and where we're going, for me, I'm always thinking, what about team life? What is the effect of that on the human body, but also other forms of life? And, when I think of autonomous vehicles and I think of AI and I think of all of these incredible developments that we're making, technological leaps, I'm thinking, there's also a huge pandemic of loneliness among young people and older, exacerbated by the pandemic. Now, I don't want to refer to the pandemic too much, but this was happening before. And these are with our tools. We feel super connected more than ever with our devices. So on the one hand, having a phone that has FaceTime as a mother allowed me to let my daughter go away to school, for a year. And I felt like she was close enough and I wasn't heartbroken enough because we could FaceTime. But she's still away. And I don't get to hug her. And if she's crying, I don't get to dry her tears. And if she's lonely, they're there, but it's not that hug. Well, when you think of the pandemic of loneliness and then you think of autonomous vehicles, what's the way that and we're designing these cities of the future, how do you run into someone? How do you have a meet cute? Where do you go for coffee? Where does that cute boy, girl, or girl, boy, or whatever your preference is? How do you make that connection? And so part of me is thinking like, wow, we got to slow down because we'll have lost something in our human development with all of this efficiency that we have. So when I look at that from a design perspective, generally with our clients now, yes, we have VR, we have AR, and I'm like, you know what? Where we can avoid an interface, let's do that. Where we can have something be super real, let's have it. Where someone can build a relationship or have a real connection, let's engineer that. Let's design that. Let's put the slow, the beautiful, the timeliness of things into our design and into our worlds in an authentic way. So I, on the one hand, we need to meet the needs of a great number of people. But on the other hand, is it the default that the poor will have no touch and the wealthy will? Will you have, beautiful gardens and things that take time for those who actually have the time, and for everyone else it's expedient? So we've taken care of the problem, but have we really, right? So when I look at the future of healthcare, and when I look at and by the way, there's only two things of value as far as I'm concerned: time and health. And, some amount of money can get you that, but you can never get time back. No one can pay you back for a bad design, a bad moment, a bad experience. even your health, right? So when you think about wellness and we think beep, 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 clack, 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 it's all painted, whatever, what about a plant? What about like materials that, come from nature? What about, the look and feel of those things for healing? What's our food look like? What are we serving it on? And the data shows put your potatoes and your vegetables and your little piece of meat on a china plate. Psychologically, you don't feel sick. So even if you're in the hospital, you can get out. And that's kind of retrograde, right? Not a melamine plate, but like, a china plate, right? Made out of porcelain. Will psychologically help you feel better, right? Because you have these little touch. So when I look at the future, I just say to everyone, you know, compete with beauty, real beauty, and just take a moment to just see like what it's gonna feel like. What are you going to experience in the future? Does that answer your question?
Well, the image that I get is that of a continuum from the healthcare we know to the therapeutic or anticipatory or preventive power of objects, experiences, and emotion. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And that's what I say to put in, right? So, yes, of course, I love predictive stuff. I think all of that's great. And having that data and behaving in a preventative way. And when I look at it, I think the name, it hasn't come up for me yet, but I'm looking at it as well care. And I feel that that is the way that we need to move. And Marco, you've talked about this in your work, right? The mark of a society is how you treat your most vulnerable. So in that sense, looking at how we treat our vulnerable, what is the way, what does care look like? And it doesn't have to be trillions of dollars. Sometimes it's just someone holding your hand, letting you know that you'll be okay. A little bit of the placebo effect that can have a tremendous effect. So I see it as that, and I'll share with you as we were designing, we were working on a prototype for a program, a series, right? Because stories, I think, help you tell the future. The stories you tell yourself today will be the future that you design, essentially, right? With lots of images, etc. You build these worlds. So we've been sort of looking at a world that's rich and abundant, right? That is, has a life center at the beginning, that we take care of all of these beings, and we're mindful about how we progress. And I had a designer work on my team to sort of do the renderings as we imagine like what a well-care center of the future would look like in the event that you happen to have a momentary turn. And it was, it has its own farm, it's growing its own food, it has farm to table food. You realize that the doctors also realize that they get the benefit of like fresh air, greenery, and flowers and trees and so on. So it was really kind of embedded into the landscape, not completely the tower on the hill. And I showed it to my colleague, and he said, no one's going to believe that. No one is going to think that that's how the world is going to look in 50 years from now or 30 years. And I'm like, why? He said, it's too beautiful. It's not realistic. And I was stung because I was like, what do you mean? Why can't the most vulnerable, doesn't matter, have the most beautiful things to get well? And I was really unnerved by that because, as we know, good design doesn't cost any more than bad design. It's the same for square footage. I mean, it just is, right? So, and I came home and I was really wrestling with it. And then Bruce started wrestling with it, and we were wrestling with it together. And then Bruce said, you're going to need to design a new vernacular for institutional design. Because if it looks beautiful, people can't tell the difference and they think it is expensive, that it's a waste of money, time, and energy, that it doesn't have that, what we have here in America, the DMV with the stucco falling out of the walls and the things glued to it. That's what service design looks like. And that's now put me on a mission to say, okay, how do we design this new vernacular that is actually conducive wherever we are in classrooms and in our hospitals and our in government buildings that allows your humanity and life to shine through, right? So that's kind of where we are. And when you think about life-centered design and you realize, we're all in rooms that have windows on two sides, like that's $1.95, right? That you have a view to the outside, that you can be grounded in nature, da 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 da. This also helps productivity and wellness, right? These are simple things.
Yeah. Filiberto, would you?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of insights, and my concern and on the healthcare, and partially you touched on that, is that when we look at the future of healthcare, we look at a lot of both AI and computers emerging, which in a way remove the empathy from the equation. At least that's the scenarios that we hear about and the companies talk about. The fact that a doctor can do a surgery operation with a remote robot from 12 time zones away.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, it's in the present. It's going to be more pervasive in the future. So the question is, how do we bring back, that empathy, that relationship, that small little things, whereas design right now has led hospital and healthcare, because it's mostly, at least in Europe, public money, so to be very, very, very efficient. I was recently in an hospital because one of my children had a problem, and we were there for 10 days. And, great healthcare, but it's literally bring your own cup. You need to have your cups from home because they're not going to give you China cups because they break and they cost money. And so you need to bring your own cups. Otherwise, they don't serve you tea or coffee.
Ooh. Wow. Wow.
And that's how, by the way, public healthcare works. I am from the south of Italy, and in Italy now, healthcare it's regional. And my region, it's very well known for being one of the highest deficits due to healthcare. And one of the reasons is that one hospital, basically, which is in Naples, it's called Cardarelli, makes half of the budget of healthcare in my region. And that hospital, it's the one hospital, it's the size of a city, basically. You have buses going around, you have taxi services inside to move from one building to the other. It's really, really very, very big. And you could walk and could get lost for hours in it without actually reaching where you want to walk. And that hospital has basically one of the ER which serves special cases from all the other regions. Okay. So you go to the hospital and you look around yourself and you see infrastructure from the 70s, and then because of course they need to be efficient because it's costing money. And so by design, it looks not, to be honest with you, very reassuring either, but yet it's where the most critical cases are treated for most of the south of Italy. In fact, I think it has more helicopter connections from the south to that hospital than any other place in Italy. They have their own, radio radar men for the helicopters because they arrive so many at the time. It's almost like an airport. So my concern here is really, how do we explain what you just said to people who run the healthcare, or politicians who run the healthcare in Europe. That healthcare needs to have that kind of empathy and sense of wellness for people to get better.
Again, it comes to design. Again, so you've got like people, processes, technology, right? And communication. And with all of that machinery, the doctors need to be trained differently. In fact, with all that machinery and that efficiency, it actually allows for that space of empathy. It should design for your care team to be able to spend the time with you, like the distractions, right? So the machines are the distractions. The thing that people forget, and again, this comes out of the research that we've done looking at how design could play a role in the New York state Medicaid redesign. Okay, so that's a budget of 60 billion with a B dollars that serves 6 million of the most vulnerable people in the state of New York. So on a per capita basis, they spend more than anybody on the planet. Okay, and the problem was nobody was happy. The patients weren't happy, and the care providers weren't happy. So my co-host, he thought, let's redesign this. And so the first process, and they used the word design, which is really interesting, but they started from an engineering and an accounting perspective. So they went for efficiency. And they were making tremendous gains. And so by this point, my colleague and friend had 7 billion with a B dollars worth of efficiency. But I turned to, and it was very, very difficult to get us into this process because they were very suspicious of the designers. And they're like, okay, well, who are you? The accounting people, who are you? The engineering people, who are you? Like, what is it that you want to do? We're actually looking at this holistically, right, to design this, this future vision. Anyway, Jason did everything he could, and again, but we just worked from the periphery, sort of coaching him from the outside. But what I said to Jason is, great, this is really amazing. But here's the thing. All of these gains that you've made, and now it's currently at $19 billion in efficiencies and savings. I said, it won't work unless you design it. You can only be efficient and engineer so long. So you really need to work on designing the relationships with the staff, the doctors and the nurses. You need to design the relationships with the insurance providers and how they speak to each other and how they agree. You need to repair and redesign the communication with the families and the patients that you have here. You actually have to look at everything that you have here is designed, not built for the purpose of the person who's here. It's built for you. We realized that hospital design for efficiency was designed by Florence Nightingale during the Civil War when she had a lot of bodies and so on. And I checked and I realized we don't have to have the rooms look like this. They don't have to sound like this. If somebody, it's expensive for someone to come to emergency, and I respect everything that they do. When someone has a trauma, 100%, you don't need flowers when somebody's, in a trauma. However, somebody wanders in and they're lonely or they're confused. Having some tea and cookies for them, having somebody in the community that's $1.95 to say, how can I help you today? You know what? Oh, right. This person is actually lonely and they just need a bit of company. That saves $10,000 for, running a full diagnostic. But that person also has a nice experience when they enter in there. They're met by a human being. They're actually, that's part of the triage. And don't you think you feel better when someone listens to you, gives you some tea, something, a warm drink, something slightly nutritious, and tells you that you're going to be okay, right? Like, we need to build the relationships in here. So I hear what you're saying, but I also said, like, imagine when somebody comes into a hospital with their child. They're terrified. They don't know what to do, and they don't know what's happening, and you do, and you speak a foreign language. It's not unlike how designers talk to their clients. If you took a beat and just explained where you were in the journey, I think you'd have better outcomes, first of all, right? Nobody does anything when they're afraid. So, what is it that we do here to design your approach that mitigates fear so that you can actually get a better response from your client, right? So, building these relationships into that experience and thinking about, well, why am I here, right? As designers, we ask that question: why do we do it like that? Why? Because we've always done it that way? Well, we can do better and we can redesign better. And we have this opportunity now to actually make not only the lives of patients better, but the lives of doctors and care and nurses and surgeons and everyone else's life better too. Because that design is like, it's not sustainable the way that they conduct their business and how they conduct their work and how those outcomes come out. And the second part is we, the consumer, everything in the world has been disrupted. Everything except for hospital care. And I tell them it's going to be a shock when you actually have people bite back that actually understand that things can be and should be better. Do you want to be behind the 8 ball? You want to get in front of that so that actually, you know what, that you have a job and that you can design the way that you'd like to practice rather having it being mandated by somebody else for you, right? So I think that that world is changing too, slowly. You know, they call it here value-based care, and there's a reciprocity there. And I think that that's where the world is going. We talked about 100 years ago. Um, you know, 100 years ago, there were some things that were nice and not so nice, but I think that there's a romance to the idea that we actually had time, human relationships, the ability to process things. There was beauty and joy around us, even in small moments, and that we shouldn't lose our humanity in the in the forward journey of progress. I think we're kind of beautiful apes in a weird way. Like there are certain weird things that we do that can be and I think should be celebrated.
Well, actually, the title of this conversation is "What's Next," because we wanted to build upon the launch of the Nexus, the book, but we also wanted to explore with you visions of the future. And I think Massive Change Network is inspired by this radical optimism. And I would actually like to twist a little bit this view of optimism. I like to go back one moment to someone you might have known or not. His name was Augusto de los Reyes. He was a very good friend of mine, and he was a pioneer of inclusive design. And
Yes.
actually, in 2013, he had an accident, and that was the most tragic event because due to mistakes at the Overlake Medical Center, he was paralyzed. And he was a brilliant designer from, well, he was with me at Philips, he was at Samsung, at Microsoft, at various other companies, Pinterest. What he did in the settlement, he received a damage compensation for whatever you can damage, compensate a damage like that. But he demanded that he would also receive the assignment to redesign the system failure that brought up the mistakes based on which he remained paralyzed. So he's a remarkable figure in American design and in global design. He passed away a couple of years ago due to complications from the COVID-19. But I think this twist of taking the most tragic failure as the opportunity to actually redesign the system. And I wanted to ask you, perhaps as a way to lead towards the end of our conversation, in the movie Mao by John and Benjamin Bergman, we see a couple of setbacks for Bruce Mao and for yourself. So the kind of criticism to massive change to the show in Vancouver, And especially, I was really impressed by the reaction when massive action in China was frozen and stopped in 2019 because of the diplomatic situation, if not crisis, between Canada and China. What is, in a way, the best failure you have seen throughout all these years, and in your design commitment as co-founder of Massive Change Network? What is the setback? Perhaps at the time it angered you the most, but that now retrospectively you see as the best opportunity in your professional or personal life?
Wow. Okay, Marco and Filiberto. I think that's a great question. And I want to say a few things. And so, you know, yes, we fail. We do. I mean, life is a process. And, but I look at those as learning opportunities, so it's really, so China, some people say, is it a failure? I'm like, no, life is long. We just happened to get in a hiccup, right? And I mean, honestly, that footage of us in China, we were actually putting together the deal and doing the whole 9 yards, and that was December 1st. And then I flew home from China, and then December 11th, what a surprise. And that was a surprise. But I, I believe that that idea of massive action, that China's committed to it. And it did sting at the time, and it was like events beyond our control. And, it was like, okay, but the ideas don't go away. In fact, you're still building on them all the time. And then when we saw the film, we were so inspired. We're like, let's just dust that up, and like the world has changed. And so we're learning from that, in terms of like maybe the scale is too large. So 65,000 square feet times 8 cities is a lot, and museums right. And so you think, okay, well, the average museum in Europe and in North America is 7,000 square feet. How could we design it better to be more modular? So we are rethinking how we do that, rethink the network. And that's the learning too. Sometimes bigger isn't always better, right? And different ways. And I think that our biggest failures always, and to us, it may not be catastrophic for the client or whatever, but when we fail to listen or really get the nuance, right? And it's like, what can we do to make our work better, our clients better, the world better? And if you can go back and fix those opportunities, but generally we don't have too many of those lying on the ground. And I'm not answering your question directly because it's like,
Oh, you did. Yeah, I think you did perfectly.
okay, because I
You
just
did
think that
perfectly.
it's not brain surgery that we're doing, although it is people's money and it's emotional. And so we're very, very careful with what we do, but we're also, you try and mitigate against untoward circumstances. But really, and it's interesting, I take issue with Bruce on that because for massive change, again, it's an evolution. You can look back on it and do a post-mortem, and we realized, like we did, we had a hypothesis that if we just showed people stuff, that they could do it. And we realized, nope. So let's go back and redesign it. So it's like, actually, you need to build those bridges. Like, you make a large number of assumptions, and from those assumptions, there's learning. And so in that case, I would say we didn't really fail, but we realized, oh, that was a missed opportunity, which we are now redesigning for.
Yeah.
And that's part of the learning. So for us, that's the design life, baby, right? I mean, you get to do a redo. If you think it's bad, you always get to fix it, and you can always solve. So I think that's the beauty of why we love what we do, and the privilege of the future of design and design thinking is that it's a place for wild imagination. It's a place for dreamers. It's a place for people who want to make the world better and systematically take those steps to get there. And bring as many people as you can to the party. I mean, because we can't do it alone. So I'm bullish on the future of design. I'm bullish on the future of synthesis, and I'm bullish on humanity, you know, getting it together to find new ways of collaborating to solve problems, right? Like, can't do it alone. So,
Well, I'm not going to elaborate on my setbacks and my failures because otherwise we need 12 hours. Because
we might as well for the marathon.
I am very self-demanding and I get irritated only if a cab arrives late. But I would like to leave the final word to close the interview to Filiberto. Thank you so much, Bisi, for this wonderful opening on what's next and on the future of design thinking, and humanities and humanity. Filiberto, would you like to
no, Bisi, I just wanted to thank you very much. It was really an honor for us to be able to talk to you about, you know, this project and the future of design and what's next. It's been a real pleasure, and we look forward to speaking to you in the future again.
Thank you, Filiberto. Thank you, Marco. And this has just been so much fun. And on to the Nexus and beyond. So see you guys later. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.